to tell you a tale. Once upon a mountaintop, 3 little trees stood and dreamed of what they wanted to become when they grew up. The first little tree looked up at the stars and said, "I want to hold treasure. I want to be covered with gold and filled with precious stones. I'll be the most beautiful treasure chest in the world." The second little tree looked out at the small stream trickling by on its way to the ocean. "I want to be traveling mighty waters and carrying powerful kings. I'll be the strongest ship in the world." The third little tree looked down into the valley below, where busy men and women worked in a busy town. "I don't want to leave the mountain top at all. I want to grow so tall that when people stop to look at me, they'll raise their eyes to heaven and think of God. I will be the tallest tree in the world." Years passed, the rain came, the sun shone, and the little trees grew tall. One day 3 woodcutters climbed the mountain. The first woodcutter looked at the first tree and said, "This tree is beautiful. It is perfect for me." With a swoop of his shining axe, the first tree fell. "Now I shall be made into a beautiful chest. I shall hold wonderful treasure," the first tree said. The second woodcutter looked at the second tree and said, "This tree is strong. It's perfect for me." And with a swoop of his shining axe, the second tree fell. Now I shall sail mighty waters," thought the second tree. "I shall be a strong ship for mighty kings." The third tree felt her heart sink when the last woodcutter looked her way. She stood straight and tall and pointed bravely to heaven. But the woodcutter never even looked up. "Any kind of tree will do for me," he muttered. With a swoop of his shining axe, the third tree fell. The first tree rejoiced when the woodcutter brought her to a carpenter's shop. But the carpenter fashioned the tree into a feed box for animals. The once beautiful tree was not covered with gold nor with treasure. She was coated with sawdust and filled with hay for hungry animals. The second tree smiled when the woodcutter took her to a shipyard. But no mighty sailing ship was made that day. Instead, the one strong tree was hammered and sawed into a simple fishing boat. She was too small and too weak to sail on an ocean or even a river. Instead, she was taken to a little lake. The third tree was confused when the woodcutter cut her into strong beams and left her in a lumber yard. What happened? The once tall tree wondered. "All I ever wanted was to stay on the mountain top and point to God." Many, many days and nights passed, and the 3 trees nearly forgot their dreams. But one night, golden starlight poured over the first tree as a young woman placed her newborn baby in the feed box. "I wish I could make a cradle for him," her husband whispered. The mother squeezed his hand and smiled at the starlight shining onto the smooth and sturdy wood. "This manger is beautiful," she said. And suddenly the first tree knew that she was holding the greatest treasure in the world. One evening, a tired traveller and his friends crowded into the old fishing boat. The traveller fell asleep as the second tree quietly sailed out into the lake. Soon a thundering and thrashing storm arose, and the little tree shuddered. She knew she did not have the strength to carry so many passengers safely through with the wind and the rain. The tired man awakened. He stood up. He stretched out his hand and he said, "Peace." And the storm stopped as quickly as it began. And suddenly the second tree knew that she was carrying the King of heaven and earth. One Friday morning, The third tree was startled when her beams were yanked from the forgotten woodpile. She flinched as she was carried through an angry, jeering crowd, and she shuddered when the soldiers nailed a man's hands and feet to her. She felt ugly and harsh and cruel. But on Sunday morning, when the sun rose and the earth trembled with joy beneath her, the third tree knew that God's love had changed everything. It had made the tree strong. And every time people thought of the third tree, they would think of God. And that was better than being the tallest tree in the world.
When we are born, we come into this world with nothing. All that we enter this world with is a cry, a beating heart and breath, and we enter into this world with life, and this is a precious gift. As we mature and labor within the confines of the man-made laws and rules and regulations of this world, we begin to acquire possessions, and let's be honest with ourselves, we say, these are mine, they belong to me. If you've had the misfortune, no, that's too milder a word, I should say the affront of being burgled. You know that feeling of having been violated, the anger and the fact that your possessions were stolen. They're mine. They belong to me. You know, it's like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. The one ring that had an extraordinary yet dark power that held Gollum prisoner. He called it my precious. It's mine. Anyhow, I digress. As I pondered on the women and the one disciple standing at the foot of Jesus' cross, I thought of how Jesus was stolen from their lives. Mary, his mother, they've taken my son away from me. Mary Magdalene, they've taken my teacher, my life giver, away from me. And John, the only disciple to be at the cross while the other disciples were hiding in fear. They've taken the Son of God away from us. They've taken our Redeemer. He's mine. Jesus is mine. The word borrow has been playing on my mind for a couple of weeks, and it got me thinking about the possessions that Jesus had. What did Jesus have? He had no home. He had no wealth. He had nothing physically of anything value. In fact, he had no possessions at all. He was cared for by his disciples and his followers, the people that he ministered to. His needs were met even by strangers. Because remember the donkey on which he rode into Jerusalem? And the room where he and the disciples celebrated Passover the night before he was to be crucified? When Jesus went about his ministry, he used what was lent him. He didn't own a large building in which to preach. He preached from a borrowed boat. He preached in the open on a hillside. He even borrowed fish and some loaves to feed the 5,000. It's as if Jesus is saying to us, may I borrow you to love you? And with my love that won't let you go, will you decide to be mine? I'm sure there must have been times when a neighbor has knocked on your door and asked if they could borrow a cup of sugar, some potatoes or flour, whatever. And invariably they would return what they borrowed from you. Do you think that we could at times borrow Jesus? On one hand, when our lives turn upside down, when grief or pain or despair enters our life, we call on him, don't we? We call on Jesus to help us, to get us through whatever we are facing. And then perhaps when all is going well, we return him to the far reaches of our minds. On the other hand, when life is good and treating us well, our faith and our trust in God is strong and we gladly profess it. And then when life throws us a curved ball, we maybe ask, Jesus, where are you? It's like we borrow our faith and then we give it back. But in truth, we actually own nothing. God owns all things, and he's allowing us to borrow everything: our spouses, our children, friends, houses, food, clothes, warm blankets, a comfy bed, and everything else that we have and enjoy while we're here on earth. It all belongs to God. Yet when he was here on earth, he claimed nothing for himself, although all things came from him, was made by him, for him, and through him. Jesus claimed nothing, not even the magnificence of his deity. But there were two things that were given to Jesus: a crown of thorns and a cross. They were his own. Jesus didn't borrow our sins, he took them, and they will never be returned to us. Through the cross, we've been gifted with salvation. Through the cross, we have been forgiven. Through the cross, Jesus has said, you don't have to borrow my love. My love will never let you go, and I give it to you. It's yours to own, to embrace. For I am always with you, and you are mine. I am your living hope. And although the darkness of today is so heavy on our hearts, may you feel the joy of living hope, because Sunday is coming. May God's grace be upon you.